Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session where we'll be talking about the nexus between soils and root health and how that impacts climate change and food security. Now, 2021 is a critical year for the recovery of food and transformation. And at this summit, we'll also be talking about, as we talk about all other aspects of food security, we'll also need to talk about what happens below ground, below when you pull out that plant from the soil, what is happening under there, and how does that impact the quality of the plant that you get. My name is Zena Bondati, and I'll be moderating this session. And to get into this session, we have a panel of about 4 people who will help us dissect this topic and what it means for you. Now, we have Yemi Akinbamijo, who's the Executive Director of the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. And Yemi has a wide experience in agricultural research and development and also matters climate change, which makes him a good person to have on this panel. And we also have Luke Henry, who is the Africa and Middle East Seed Care Head of Syngenta. And Luke has been with Syngenta since 2015, and he has worked in Middle East, he has worked in Africa, and he has such a wide range of experience, and I'm sure you'll be happy to hear what he has seen on the ground from experiences from both Middle East and Africa. And we also have Dr. Esther Kimani, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Pest Control and Products Board of Kenya, and she has a PhD in crop protection and a master's in plant pathology. And before her current appointment as the PCPB CEO, Dr. Kimani also headed the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, and she also brings a lot of experience to this discussion. And we also have Dr. Michael Musico, who's the Agriculture Director at the Nature Conservancy. Now, Dr. Musico has a distinguished set of transdisciplinary achievements in research and leadership, and holds a PhD in agricultural anthropology with an emphasis on soils and smallholders. So of course, we'd like to hear his experience with smallholder farmers and how their relationship with the soils and roots affect the yields of the crop that they get. And we also have Mandla Nkomo, who's the Chief Growth Officer at CGIA Excellence in Agronomy of 2030. Now, Mandla is an agribusiness development executive with over 23 years sector experience, and he has worked in the private sector, agribusiness companies, as well as consulting within NGOs that operate in this agribusiness space. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this discussion. Now, first, I'd like to allow everyone at least 7 minutes to make their opening remarks. First, we'd like to hear from Mandla.
Thanks a lot, Zainab. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I think it's a pity that there's only one lady amongst all these gentlemen. So it's just one rose amongst the thorns. But I think it's important for us to be having this conversation at this time, as we think about food systems, about transforming agriculture, particularly on the African continent, to ask some critical questions about how do we bring about the promise of better, soil and root health management. And my view is that the critical question we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we promote farmer agency? How do we put farmers at the center of restoring our soils? How do we put farmers at the center of, improving root health? What tools do they need? How do we make sure that they are able to do those small actions that will actually make a difference, not only for themselves, but also for the continent as a whole? But we also need to ask ourselves that, are the systems that we currently have, for delivering technical knowledge and advisory services to farmers, are they still fit for purpose? Are they asking the right questions? And if you look at this image of the so-called future agronomist, you realize that they need to be a multifaceted individual. They need to be an enabler. They need to be connected to the field, but at the same time, they need to understand and interpret data. They need to be a master of digital tools and must continue to provide, knowledge to farmers. So the second question I think we need to ask is, how do we adequately equip this frontline staff to be able to support farmers adequately? And I think, from a CGIAR perspective, one of the things that we've decided is important is to really be focused, razor-sharp focused around, creating delivery models that are tapping into where farmers are, where extension people need to be, and bridging that gap. And one of the ways of bridging that gap is really building innovative partnerships between public or private sector entities, people who've got access to extension networks, build what we call minimum viable products that are taking the best of science, the best of data and analytics and farmer needs, and then creating 10 key solutions that can actually bring about meaningful change. I think if we do that, we would start to see, in my view, a major revolution and transformation in how we are localizing soil and root health management at a farmer level, and not at a conference like this one where we can discuss the theory, etc., but it only makes sense if we can also do the practice. I'll stop there for now, Zainab.
Thank you, Mandla. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Michael Musico, who will talk to us about how enhancing soil and root health can help us mitigate and adapt to climate change. Dr. Musico.
Thank you so much for inviting me. As you've heard, my name is Michael Musico, and I'd like to share some thoughts based on the work we do at the Nature Conservancy. So at the Nature Conservancy, we interested in agriculture that is regenerative. By that we mean, the type of agriculture that actively restores nature in and around production areas while mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and preserving the livelihoods of farmers, fishers, ranchers, and others who work to provide food. And especially, we here thinking about climate, therefore the future is extremely important. Now, I'd like just to mention a couple of things that are important when we're talking about agriculture that is regenerative, or that, a system that is regenerative. It simply means that we've got to engage first of all, I have to mention that African soils are getting degraded very fast. And therefore, we've got to think about means, ways that we've got to restore these soils and improve them. And by so doing, we're thinking here at the Nature Conservancy, this is something that is now widespread. What are these approaches or practices that are important and which can be used in particular contexts here in Africa? And so talking about context is important because Africa is something like 70% or more smallholder. And we're thinking about practices that can fit, for example, agroforestry, precision, nutrient management. As you know, African soils are heavily depleted, and you've got to think precision. Fertilizer is expensive, and you want to use those nutrients to enhance our soils by using them properly. And I'll mention specifically, if you want to have roots, better roots in the soil, so you better apply phosphorus, for instance. Fertilizers, of course, we know they pollute. And if you do them in isolation without increasing soil carbon, you end up with those fertilizers in rivers, in places that they are not supposed to be. And so you've got to know that there are other methodologies which we call nature-based solutions. The types of solutions that mimic nature. And for example, intercropping, simple techniques that smallholder farmers can use. And intercropping is interesting because we people working in agriculture, that's what I refer to, we have been insisting on use of legumes, for example, in intercrop systems and relay systems to ensure that soils are covered throughout the year, that you ensure that roots, live roots, stay in the soil as long as possible. Because we know roots are the conduit, they are the part that that plants use to as a system. Talking about systems here, that carbon gets into the soil. But we've got other practices, just to mention quickly, for instance, silvopasture, zero tillage. Zero tillage is interesting because, as you know, we've had a long period of time where we've lost a lot of soils because of tillage. Tillage is the one single activity that can indeed destroy soils. And as you till more, you lose, more of the carbon. You're simply releasing that carbon, which is causing global warming. And that's one of the things that we need to really get clearly to practitioners and people, that it doesn't have to be zero. It can be minimum. It's reduce the tillage. But there are other many things. This science is rich in what we can do to improve our soils and to enhance that. Maybe just go back a little bit and say, so when we talk about enhancing soil health, we're not just talking about soil itself per se, because a lot of things revolve around the soils. The soil is the single most important pathway that we have in terms of storing carbon available to us. Of course, oceans are the biggest store of carbon, but we don't have the means to manipulate. So soil becomes extremely important to us in terms of managing, mitigating climate. So I'll stop there for now. I just wanted to give a brief, emphasis on how soils are critical and why regenerative agriculture is essential. And I just gave some examples of what regenerative practices are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Musico. Next, we'll hear from Luke Henry, the head of seed care at Syngenta, and he will talk to us about the role of private sector solutions and sustainable innovations, both current and upcoming, in this conversation. Luke?
Thank you, Zainab. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you for the organizers, for AGRF. I think it's a very important conference, and we all have to learn. We can learn a lot from it. So it's very clear to all of us, right? We face a lot of challenges at the moment, and some of them are even more pronounced in Africa. Malnutrition, hunger, climate change, and enhancing and improving soil health is key to address these at the early stages of our food systems. Our CEO, Eric Fierwald, he likes to take a quote from Charles Kellogg that says, "There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together." I love this quote. I think it's very true. Now, when you look at the facts, 90% of the soils today are degraded already. And more can happen if we don't take actions. I think we all agree that tackling soil and root health is key, to feeding Africa and feeding the world. From the politicians to the farmer, including everybody around this table, I think we all agree with this. Now, when you look at the practices, they change very slowly, right? And I think they change slowly because of the antagonism between the short-term obligations to produce enough food and the long-term needs to preserve our soil resilience and fertility. And I think Mandla showed it well, farmers have to learn a lot of things. And we can't wait, on the other hand, because we need to produce food for tomorrow. So all these agricultural technologies that target soil and root health can help to address this antagonism. And for me, it's what we can call a public good, right? It's something that will help society to benefit as a whole. Seeds are critical to all the food systems. Now, it's amazing when you look at a maize seed, how big it is and how big the plant becomes afterwards, right? And you wonder, how is that possible? Now that seed is very exposed to stresses, be it climate, be it disease, pest, and yield can vary immensely, if the seed is stressed or not. So our contribution at Seed Care is at the seed level. We try to do two things. First, we try to reduce the stresses that the seed is exposed to. And second, we try to improve the direct environment in which the seed evolves. And one of the advantage of these seed care solutions, or the seed coating or the seed applied solutions, is that it doesn't require any additional step in the chain, right? The seeds, you take the seed and you plant them. And that's no extra effort, meaning a solution that can be implemented today. So let me just give you a few examples. For example, we can help through these seed care technologies to reduce some soil deficiencies. So if you take inoculants, for example, I think Dr. Musico mentioned legumes before, right? If you can inoculate, those legumes, then they can, through these synergies, symbiosis between the bacteria and the seed, you can assimilate and fixate the nitrogen of the air, which then can address some of the fertilization issues. We have technologies, and it's interesting because farmers show that to us. We didn't even notice when we developed it. We have technologies that can help to develop a bigger roots, larger root system, which is critical for the plants to develop, because you have access to more nutrients, to more water, which, helps to mitigate those stress, for example. Of course, we develop a lot of solutions also to combat pests, which are, today's obligations, which I mentioned before, versus the long-term needs. So, as I said, we try to address stresses, but also the environment in which the seed operate. The bigger the rhizosphere, which is the area where the roots are developing, the better for the plant and for the soil, right? A stronger rhizosphere will help, a healthier soil, more microflora, microfauna, and will eventually help into having higher yields. Let me just add a few words on the way we operate. The private sector is sometimes seen as being, not as careful as other organizations. I can tell you, pay a lot of attention to how we develop our formulations and to the way we deliver it. And this is where seed care is a nice way to reach smallholders. We work with seed companies that can reach millions of smallholders. And when you work with a seed company, you have to train, say, 50, 100 operators that can then reach millions of smallholders. So we pay a lot of attention on how we train them. We have a team that goes seed sites, and train the people. Stewardship, of course, safety, and this enables that technology to be, safely used even at farmer level. So we're clearly, looking to, new innovations. And I have to say, this seed care world has changed over the past 10 years, from purely combating pests to, root health, soil health. Seed care is one tool in the toolbox. So partnering for impact is critical. You may remember we had a forum earlier in the year. I see some of the panelists here. So the only way is to work together. So very true, educating the farmers, getting all the agronomy techniques, the seed care components. I see Dr. Kimani is here also having the right regulatory environment, to organize all this is very important. So I'll stop here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you. Very informative words there. And next we'll hear from Yemi Akinbamijo from FARA, who will talk to us about the importance of soil and root health in achieving sustainable food systems and why this conversation is critical to the UN Food Systems Summit. Yemi?
All right, thank you very much, Zainab, and good afternoon, good morning from Accra this morning. Good afternoon to everybody in Nairobi and from wherever you are hearing us. So thank you very much, Zainab. I'll be speaking about enhancing soil and root health for resilience, the food and nutrition security, especially as you mentioned in the context of the food systems on the continent. Well, I think my point of departure is that it is crucial to understand that achieving good resilience, achieving food and nutrition security within the context of the food system for the continent can only happen in a coordinated, coherent, global effort, continent-wide, that are directed toward these common goals of building resilience and a food and nutrition secure Africa. But in the context of soil and root health, which is the basis of the conversation of today, I make bold to say that we need to look at the soil beyond just the physical element that you see on the ground, but to look at it in the wider context of what are the environmental implications that emanate from the soil, the economic implication, and also, for crying out loud, the sociological implications. Now, when we look at both the environmental and the economic, you tie that to what the political principles asked of us to keep Africa food secure, which has been a perennial challenge for the continent. And we're still not able to get our acts together to keep this continent food and nutrition secure. So we realized that looking at the soil and root health component of the work we do, especially in the context of the larger frames of CADEP and Malabo indicators, the biennial review that is already showing that there are gaps in meeting the SDGs. What do we have to change, and what are the key elements that require immediate urgent attention? Now it's been stated that over 90% of the land is degraded, and many of these we're actually at a tipping point. We're at a precipice that, I mean, if we don't pull back now, we may actually go beyond what is called the plastic limit. And I also would like to put a few statements for us, our consideration. One is that the soil in itself is the pivot for change. It is a problem in the sense that we have degraded soil, but if we can reverse the trend, we will have a solution in our hands. And it is also true that on the continent today, when you look at the demographics, that more than 70% of the workforce is in the agricultural sector. And of these 70%, more than 80% are women. And our food, our nourishment is derived from this kind of setting. Then it makes sense to see soil beyond just the physical element, but rather to see it from the lens of our livelihoods. And therefore, I dare say also that livelihood is inextricably linked with soil health. So maybe if we look at it from that lens, it will be easier for us to understand that enhancing soil and root health will automatically translate into building resilience and strengthening the kind of food system that we are looking to build for Africa. Now, there are diverse technologies that are happening. We've just for naming an arbitrary technology, for example, the water efficient maize for Africa, or the orange flesh sweet potato, name it. Or you look at even technologies, mechanical engineering, you look at all sorts of machines and machineries that are being fabricated to enhance productivity, or you look at what is being done in terms of genetic work, the advancement of in genetics, and trying to bridge the yield gap. All of these are good, but tell me or show me one of these technologies that will translate into livelihoods without the soil. The answer is zero. So that tells me a lot more that all technologies will ultimately depend on soil. And we already said that livelihoods depend on soil. Now, if you take these two statements together, it ties very well with what Luke just mentioned, and I like the way you put it. But in my own script here, I put it as soil is life. Now, if we look at it and we kind of disaggregate that statement, that phrase, that soil is life, perhaps it will also help us to see how we can change the appreciation of management strategies that we apply to the soil. It's been stated that this is a non-renewable resource that we have. And what it means is that if we totally destroy it, then it will be a recipe for disaster, a catastrophe that is waiting to happen. So managing these resources is a function of the common appreciation of the significance of soil and root health to our common sustenance on the planet. So given the high degree of degradation that is already reported in Africa, it is only wise to see this as a ticking time bomb that is waiting to implode. Now, to avert this kind of disaster is not going to be the responsibility of just one person. And the strategy, therefore, is to withdraw ourselves from seeing the problems in a compartmentalized manner, rather than a continuum in which everyone has a role to play. The soil is only the launch pad. Yes, Zainab?
Your statement.
Come again?
You need to conclude. I'm saying you need to conclude your statement.
Okay, so, all right, maybe I can stop here, that the soil is only a launch pad for our common good. And then I will, if I have another opportunity, I will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, last but not least, we'll hear from Dr. Esther Kimani. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Kimani. Unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. I'm thanking the organizers of this forum for inviting me to this panel. When I saw the invitation, I was like, oh, I'm not a soil person. But later, as I looked at the issue better, I realized that actually all the successes I've had in agriculture, I wouldn't have had it without if there was no healthy soil. And this is because the soil is beyond the inert materials that we see. It also hosts a lot of microorganisms, and also, of course, the plants that we look at, we protect or certify for, if it's for exports or the food we grow, the nutritious food that we eat. All of it comes because of the healthy soils. So, and looking into it, agriculture is very important in the country, especially in Kenya, most of the African countries, but in Kenya also we do a lot of exports. And it earns the country a lot of foreign exchange earning through exports of tea, coffee, horticulture. All these bring into the country a lot of foreign exchange earning because as you know, in Kenya, we don't export a lot of minerals. So agriculture creates a lot of opportunities for people in employment, either through farming or through the value chain, even the transport, logistics, and all those, and including ICT for people who connect people to markets. And so there's a lot that agriculture contributes into. But directly it contributes over 27% to the GDP of the country. So without that, then we wouldn't have, without healthy soils, we wouldn't be able to achieve all that. So at then I was like, at PCPP, why am I being invited into a soil forum? But I also saw that PCPB has a role to play actually in the health of the soils, yeah, because okay, first let me just say what we do at the Pest Control Products Board. Our job is mainly to register those people who are doing businesses with pest control products. Let me call them pest control products, not just pesticides, but also others. And so we register them. We also regulate the imports and the exports, the manufacture, the distribution, and also on the safe use of those products. And looking at it, we realize that and especially we focus on pesticides, you realize that the populations, people are becoming very conscious about the health of the plants that they are eating. And so if we are to reduce the amount of pesticides that is being used in the products, in the production of crops and the food we eat, we need very healthy soils. Yeah, because soils, we need to healthy soils, we need to improve the microbial populations in the soils. We need the soils to be able to break down the nutrients so that the root systems can grow well and the plant can be strong and healthy, so that when it is attacked by pests, it's not destroyed or attacked so much, so that even if you have to use the pesticides, you only use, you don't have to use so much to manage the pests, because I couldn't think of a time that actually we will get all the amount of food that we produce or the quality of the food that we produce, especially for exports, without using some pest control products and that even pesticides. So the only way we can be able to meet some of the requirements on plant health or the health of the food that we are producing is to improve on the soil, so that we can have strong plants with good root systems. The other thing we also realize is that also plants are attacked, and I was like, okay, now there are all these populations of microorganisms in the soils. How do we enhance the good microorganisms, and so that we can be able to manage also the other pathogens that are destroying the crops? So even as we use the pest control products, we need to enhance the organic matter in the soils, so that plants can be able to grow vigorously in a healthy manner, so that the microbial populations within the soil can be able to regulate each other, even as we enhance them through the technologies that the companies develop. I think I won't say much, because through those actions we'll be able to produce nutritious food. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kimani. So now we're going to go into a session where we now have a discussion and questions and answers. First, I'd like to pick up something that Dr. Musico mentioned about agroforestry. Dr. Musico, when you talk about agroforestry, does it matter the kind of trees you plant? Because as you, in my experience as an agriculture journalist, I've met a number of farmers who have said that some trees that they planted have turned their soils acidic. Does it matter what kind of tree you plant?
Yes, it matters quite a lot. First of all, let's begin with what are you planting that tree for? We're emphasizing that farmers need to, to do agriculture in a much more organized way by doing some planning. If you're planting trees which are, that you need to integrate with crops, that's agroforestry basically, you've got to go for trees which are good in nutrient cycling. The types of trees, or should we call them shrubs, that do not interfere with the yield or in fact enhances yield. There are those trees that are available, many of them that have been promoted by institutions like the World Agroforestry Center, CIAT, CALROD, Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization, like Caliandra, for instance, Lucina. But we've got also other trees that grow, they're not shrubs, like Phythabia, that if you've been in research circles, you've heard a lot, that they can indeed, be grown with crops and perform much more critical role than just fuel wood or just nutrient cycling. They can also be used for fodder, So whatever the farmer wants to do with that tree is important, and where they grow it on the farm. There are some soils that are good, that you can plant trees that grow taller, but where you're growing crops, leguminous trees, which perform very well in terms of nutrient cycling, and generally their leaves, when they fall, they generally enrich the soils. And so we're actually talking about root and soil here, and that combination cannot be lost to us. That's the short answer that I'll give you.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Mandla, there's this thing that farmers like to do, burn the fields when they've already when they harvest, they burn the fields, be it the residue, or maybe they had their crop was infected by some disease or pest at some point, and so they burn. How does this impact on the health of the soil and the roots of the crop that will be planted afterwards?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Zainab. So I think burning is one of those practices that, depending on when and why you do it, can either have positive or negative impacts. But often, I think what you find in, especially where I come from in Southern Africa, it's legislated that after you harvest your cotton crop, you need to burn the cotton residue. And that's something that Dr. Kimani would understand well, because it's all about trying to keep the disease pressure low, because cotton tends to attract a lot of pests. But now when we look at it from a regenerative agricultural approach, which Dr. Musico was talking about, it's actually to the farmer's advantage to try and, as much as possible, have minimum disturbance of the soil, have incorporation of crop residues back into the soil. And burning, unfortunately, sometimes then reduces the potential positive impact that you can get from the residues that come from the soil. So it depends on the context, but in some instances, it's not really a wise practice. Farmers will be losing out on that rich organic matter, which is essential for actually enriching their soils. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that soils that are low, for example, in soil carbon, then struggle to even utilize other nutrients. So if your soils are already low in carbon, you can put as much fertilizer as you want, but your plants will not be able to utilize it as well as they would if your soils had high carbon. So we really need to educate farmers, which is why, in our view, it's that intersection between the knowledge that all of us scientists have and the people who actually work the soil. Because if we are not focusing on empowering farmers, we either allow them to become the biggest threat to soil health, or actually become the biggest, salvation for our soils if they can acquire the right knowledge and practice it.
Thank you, Mandla. I'd like to bring in Luke now here. I'd like to understand, how would a farmer go about interpreting that what is happening below ground just by looking at the plant? For example, there's this potato disease that is now becoming a problem here in Kenya, the PCN. And some scientists say you can't tell that your crop is actually affected by PCN unless you pull it out of the ground and you look at the roots, and then you'll start to see the impact of the PCN. How would a farmer cultivate that relationship to be able to know when the soils or the roots are sick by looking at the plants?
Thank you, Zainab. And it's a very good question, because the mystery of what's happening, below ground, and this has been for years ignored and not understood, and that's actually very difficult, to know what happens there. And you need people to research on this and to look at that. So to answer your question briefly, yes, taking a few plants, take it out and look at the roots. And we encourage our farmers to do that, right? You want to know what's happening down there. You want to know if your root system is in a good shape or not. So of course, you know the history of your field, the previous crops. So you can have by monitoring, you can have a feel for, the problem you may get on your field or not. The other option is to do soil sampling. And this is something which we need to develop more and more to understand how healthy is your soil, what's in there. It's costly, fair enough, but it's very important. It also helps to manage, fertilization and other stuff like this. So I think this is an important element. What we do in seed care, we have developed what we call rhizotrons. So we cultivate plants in glass boxes. We can study what's happening below ground. You can see, how the roots is developing. So by taking some specific soil samples of those fields which are difficult, we put them in our rhizotrons, we plant the seeds, and then we can see clearly what's happening below ground. So there is no easy answer here. All the stuff that happens down there needs to be studied, analyzed, and the fact that we all think about soil health and root health is a huge step forward. Years ago, we didn't care too much. And the healthier the root system, the healthier the rhizosphere, the healthier the soil. So you want those plants to to grow and to develop so that your soil benefit also from it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, Yemi, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the place of mechanization and how that may or may not impact on the soil health. For example, there are some modes of plowing, some kinds of plows that are said to be making the soil create a hard pan. And now when it forms the hard pan, then the roots are not able to penetrate properly. And therefore the plant will not reach its maximum potential. Talk to us about the future of mechanization in this soil and root health conversation.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And it's one that actually demands a good balance between the preserving the soil ecosystem and automation or mechanization on the field. Now, it is important that the ecosystem in the soil is preserved as much as possible. And when you look at the soil structure, when you look at the cross-section of the soil, pedologists will tell us you need, the pedologist is the soil scientist, the top 10 inches is where you really want your roots to be, because that's where the bulk of the carbon, your nutrients are lodged there. Now, the moment you bring in heavy machines, or you do plowing in a deep, if you bring in moldboard plows that cut deep into the soil, you immediately begin to alter the natural architecture of that soil system. Pedologists will tell you once you alter that, you also alter the ecosystem. You alter the accessibility of the roots. When you put your crops there, you alter the accessibility to the nutrients as well. So in a way, while it is important to use the mechanical advantage, but it must not also be to the disadvantage of the ecosystem of the soil, because once you do that, then the purpose of bringing in the machines immediately is defeated. So it's a good balance, and that's why you've had phrases like zero tillage. That's why you've had phrases, in zero tillage. What that means is that you go into the exact location, and that is also what you hear about when people talk about precision agriculture, that you go into a particular space on the field and you apply all the technologies you need to apply without much distortion to the natural ecosystem and architecture of the soil. So in closing, what I'll say is the good balance between preservation of the ecosystem of the soil and achieving at the same time the benefits of mechanization. Zaina?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Dr. Kimani, I'd like to bring you in here a little bit, talk about soil organic matter. You mentioned organic matter and the importance of having organic matter. A couple of months ago, Kenya tried to change some laws on how the relationship between, what's it called, manure and how to use it. And in that law, there was a word that said it would outlaw the use of raw manure. And those words, raw manure, created an uproar amongst farmers to the point that the government had to withdraw that proposed law. Should you be using raw manure on your field, really?
Thank you for the question. And having come from a plant pathology background, so I'm quite familiar with microorganisms. Though in this case is manure and the microorganisms in the manure. Manure can be very good in enhancing soil fertility, in that it will contribute a lot of microorganisms in the soil that will also act in improving the soil structure and also enhancing the amount of microorganisms that break the nutrients such as phosphorus, nitrogen, magnesium, and make them available for plants. However, I'm glad that you emphasize the word low manure, because at least the media had picked it and they out of context, and they were saying that the government had outruled the use of manure. It had only outruled the use of low manure. And why? This is because when you're dealing with animals, you may have diseases that can be transmitted from animals to human through the low manure. And therefore, it is important that people wait for, when the manure is breaking down, it heats up, and most of those microorganisms or those pathogens that may be transmitted to human may be destroyed in that process. And so when you use the manure that is not raw, then you are not risking human beings to contracting diseases that can be transmitted from animals to the people. And so I would just encourage people to trust the government more because most of the laws that the government makes for your protection or just creating a fair business environment.
Perhaps Dr. Kimani will tell us, what is raw manure?
Raw manure is the what would I call it? It's the feces from the animal when it's still fresh. Yeah, when it's still fresh. You see, when the manure is being used, it has broken down, it has stayed for some time and heated up, and also other microorganisms have also the ones that can really, the good microorganisms have also developed more or multiplied, so they're able also even to fight the bad ones. So what the raw manure is the one that is quite fresh from the animals before the microorganisms that can be dangerous to human have died off. Yeah.
That raw manure therefore is not safe to put on your plants.
It may be safe for the plant, but it's not safe for the human to handle. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I see man.
Yes.
Not like he has some comments about this something, but do you have comments about that?
I do, and as a bit of a cattle farmer myself in my spare time, when we talk about improving soil fertility, we all know that mixed farming systems that integrate livestock and crop farming are an important part of the solution. But I think it goes back to the point of knowledge. And I think, like the good doctor has just said, when manure is still raw, it still contains quite a lot of pathogenic organisms. And it's therefore important for it to be matured and conditioned before it is applied, you know, in plants. In this country, like in Kenya, where you grow a lot of vegetables, you know, you are increasing the chance of having, you know, things like E. coli showing up in fresh vegetables. So it's important that manure is a key part of integrated soil fertility management, but it also has a proper use. And it's that preparation that is important. So for me, it's really about us being obsessed about delivering good quality knowledge to farmers in a way that they understand, because ultimately they are the ones that will apply the knowledge. And this is a classic example, the issue of raw manure. Farmers use manure all the time, but all we're trying to say there is that, look, if you use it raw on things like leafy vegetables and so forth, chances are your stuff will get rejected when it's tested by Dr. Kimani and others. So it's really about transferring knowledge in a way that farmers themselves can understand and apply it properly.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have a question here coming from Betty Nyayal. And Betty would like to know, can the use of herbs in a cropping system help tackle some of the soil and root health challenges experienced by sub-Saharan African farmers and also enhance productivity? I'd like Luke to answer that question.
Thank you for the question. You know, herbs. I see the use of herbs in a cropping system. So, you know, maybe she wants to elaborate a bit more what she means by herbs. When I see the question clearly, you know, I guess she's introducing here the notion of rotation, and yes, rotation is very, very important for soil and root health. So this is sometimes forgotten, but that's a basic. You know, if you want to cultivate, you know, the fertility and the structure of your soil, alternating crops. Your earlier question about, you know, the disease that may affect one crop but not the other. So yes, for sure, rotation is an ally in the toolbox here.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yemi, you have any ideas on how herbs can be used to tackle some of the soil and root health challenges?
I think I have the same challenge that Luke has in really understanding the question from Betty, simply because herbs is so generic in that, and it's very difficult to nail this down to what she means by herbs in tackling roots. But if I provide a generic answer, there is in agriculture what we call the green manure. And green manure is just by lopping fresh herbs, fresh foliage, and using them to kind of reincorporate into the soil to improve the organic carbon content of the soil. Now, if you use foliages of, for example, if you grow baby corn, and this is something I have done before. If you grow baby corn, you only use 20% of the biomass for food. So what happens to the 80%? So, and this is good quality biomass. And what some people do is to, you know, chop it up and reintegrate it into the soil because it came from the soil anyway, and use that to improve the quality of the soil. But even to make it even better, what I have done when I was still hands-on research was to pass the chopped foliage of baby corn, which is only in the field for less than 60 days, pass it through a dairy animal, get my milk from that foliage, and pick up the waste from behind the animal and put that back in a quick recycling, and there you get a win-win situation. So I don't know if it addresses Betty's situation or Betty's question, but green manure is definitely a well-known and tested process in agriculture. Thank you.
Dr. Musico is raising his hands. I think he has ideas. Dr. Musico?
I was giving the example of Tectonia diversifolia, the Mexican sunflower, which in East Africa has been promoted before when EME was mentioning, and I was thinking that would be a good example. It is also used as a medicinal plant, and if it breaks down very fast when you apply in the soil, and it can indeed release nutrients, rapidly compared to other leaves. That's the one that came into my mind, when I saw that word herb. Thank you.
Thank you. There's also another question from Putso Nyathi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And Putso would like to know, how can we work with governments to embrace regenerative agriculture? In most of sub-Saharan Africa, governments have input subsidy schemes that seem to promote synthetic fertilizer because of quick results. And I'd like Dr. Kimani to answer this, because Kenya does have an input subsidy program. So maybe she could draw from experiences from Kenyan governments. Dr. Kimani?
That one is a hard one, especially because most of the time when government comes in, it's coming in with the products that are already developed. But that is if we are talking about input subsidy. But however, in our extension, or when we are advising farmers, and even as in my introductory remarks, I said is that we advise farmer on integrated pest management or way of enhancing the soils using like those green manure, so that you don't have to put so much of those synthetic inputs. However, on when it comes to subsidy, other than the training, I can't think of anything else. But maybe as more and more people develop technologies, because like now there are people who are developing technologies on the use of something like rabbit urine, and also the manure. And what I would encourage people as they develop these technologies is to take them through the regulatory systems, so that they can be recognized by government as reliable technologies that manage whichever problem is being managed, whether it's fertility or pest management. And I think with our people, most of the time we have had many challenges, because like the one I've given example, the rabbit urine. When we try to advise the people who are promoting those technologies, it's like they couldn't trust government to take them through those kind of processes. So what I would encourage people who have those alternative technologies other than the synthetic fertilizers and the others also to develop standards, to make sure that it's taken through a standard development process, and also for standardization, because government would want to deal with something which they are sure that if we say it's good today, even tomorrow it will be good. And anybody, and if someone from Uganda also wants to import, it will still be good in Uganda. So for Ugandans. So I think most of these other alternative technologies most of them have not been taken through, but through the processes of certification. But recently, there's someone came up with a technology of pest management of what is this weed called? There's a weed that attacks maize, especially in Nyanza. I have forgotten its name right now. Someone has came up with technologies, yeah, where they can striker, yes, where they can manage that striker, and they were able to take the process through the Pest Control Products Board, that is through CARO, the Kenya Agricultural Research and Livestock Research Organization, and now the product has been approved and it can be marketed. So it's the same way. That's the only, if someone is willing to take, is sure of something, they can approach government, and then it can be evaluated accordingly and recognized as a method for management of whether it's fertility or pests. Thanks.
Mandla has got his hand up. I think you want to respond to the same question, Mandla?
Yes, please, Zainab. So I think asks a very important question. I think if you look across the continent, everyone will agree that wherever, government fertilizer subsidy schemes have been introduced, they've had a very early level of success where we've seen improvements in yields and so forth. But the truth is also that you immediately see some flatlining after a short while. And I think this is where Putso's question is coming from, to say it's not an either or. We absolutely need synthetic fertilizers, but we're applying synthetic fertilizers into soils. We're applying them into soils. So we need to know more about the soils that the farmers have access to, and make sure that these fertilizers are coming together bundled with other services that will actually improve the soils. So for example, from a technology point of view, we now are able to give site-specific nutrient management advisory, because we've got maps like the ISDA map that can give us soil status up to a 30-meter resolution. Now, if you take that knowledge, the power of synthetic fertilizer, and you bundle it with soil management practices, then I think we can start to see a much, much faster growth in the yields and productivity of our farmers. But taking a hammer and nail approach is not going to work, and it's clearly not working. Thank you.
Yemi also has his hand up. Yemi, as you respond to that, also respond to the next question, where Gadan Dan would like to know which parts of Africa have the soils with the poorest health.
Okay, let me take that one first. It would be preemptive to name places. Virtually every part of every country has degraded soils in varying degrees, and that is one information that we really don't have on top of our fingers at the moment. I am aware that FARA is collaborating with a few institutions in a program that we call Soils for Africa. And I'm also aware that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also is working on the characterization of soil mapping of the continent. And I know that quite a good job has been done in Ghana, where we are. So I think it's very difficult, Dan, to say it's country A or B that has the worst. So what I will tell you, without any fear of contradiction, is that African soils are terribly degraded, at the verge of irreversible status. So I don't know if that helps, but going to name countries will not do much help. Now, Zainab, the reason I put up my hand is that I've seen that Betty asked the question, and I thought that all the answers we've given did not do justice to her question. But now that she had a little bit fine-tuned the question, I thought I could also provide a more specific answer given the information that we now have. So she is talking about how you can use some herbs in the preservation of soil and root health. Now, I will say yes. I mean, because you've mentioned some mints, you mentioned mint, basil, and so on. I personally have seen in some places, in Cuba, for example, in the context of organic agriculture, that where there is zero use of chemical pesticides or pesticides of chemical origin, these places have really developed very robust integrated pest management strategies. And I've seen with my eyes that when you plant spring onion, for example, using the chemistry of the plants, releasing their pheromones and aromatic compounds at certain times of the day, they prevent some pests from attacking crops like cabbage, lettuce. I've seen it, and it works. They just intercrop them with these other crops that kind of emit some aromatic compounds that are irritable to these other invasive or pests, let me put it that way. So you're right, and I think it is a possibility that you can use the strength, the aromatic element or the pheromonic element of some other crops to preserve the prevent infestation by some pests. Okay, those are my 2 cents.
Okay, Simon Winter has a comment, and he says it is very important for the rotational crops, especially for smallholders with limited resources, that they have rotational crops with strong market demand and profitability potential. We have to help farmers identify such opportunities and then enable them to respond. And then there's also a question: what interventions do governments have to ensure sustainability of sound soil health, or are they only enacting laws to imprison soil users? And Luke, would you like to take that on?
Yeah, the question is dealing about laws to imprison soil users.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the end of the question though. You know, government has a big role to play. It's very clear, and I think Dr. Kimani was very clear in explaining us why we need governments and why we need to regulate, why we need to understand and prove what we do. If government should have more, you know, should have soil health high on their agenda, yes. You know, I think this is something which we all can benefit from and will benefit from. And Yemi was very clear. He said it very clearly. You know, we are at the edge of irreversible losses, so we need that to be much higher on the agenda. So you know, I don't want to, you know, talk about presenting people or not presenting people. You know, that's not my my area. But I think having more awareness at government levels on soil and root health, absolutely yes.
Great, Dr. Musico, you want to respond to the same?
Yes, just to contribute to what sort of an extension of what Luke has said. The government has a huge role, and when you listen very carefully what Esther and Mandla were explaining, the issue of the role of government and information, you'll see in Africa there has been a reducing trend of extension officers. And that's a critical element, because the previous question is talking about identifying, you know, crops that, you know, are good for the market, but who is going to be advising farmers who are poor, who can't pay for those services? It is the government that needs to pay, at least to contribute, and also to ensure that, you know, access to those markets function, and therefore that their role is large enough never to ignore. I was recently actually told that all of us work for the government, whether you work for an international organization or not, or the nation media, we somehow are working to contribute to welfare of society. So we all have a role to make sure that we contribute into that change and to enable governments to make that difference. There's much more the government can do, but those are just examples. Thank you.
Great. So we have about 40 minutes left. So I'd like us to start going into our final conclusion and concluding remarks. Now, when you look at the African soil system and the food system, the fertility is declining. And the farmer who's working this land, the majority of the farmers working this land are very smallholder farmers, many of who are in very remote areas and may or may not have access to information or technologies to improve the health of their soils and the roots. What are some of the traditional technologies that they can employ in their smallholder system at home as quick fix solutions? Mandla, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, but I think I just want to premise my answer with building on the point you make that we are facing this crisis of smallholder farmers bearing the brunt of reduced fertility of their soils. And we're starting to see it, you know, in big cities like here in Nairobi or in Johannesburg. Smallholder farmers are voting with their feet. They are leaving the countryside and moving to the urban areas to live lives that are even worse than what they left in the rural areas, because that asset that is the basis of their livelihood, is no longer doing what it needs to do to provide sustenance. So my view is that it will be unfair for us to continue a system that only brings in knowledge from outside and doesn't take into account farmers' own knowledge of their cropping systems, of their farming systems. We therefore need to have, like Dr. Musico said, a much stronger extension system that, first of all, knows how to listen, knows how to observe, and then provides tailored advisory services, which help to build on a combination of what farmers themselves know and understand and what the latest technology is saying. But often we come in with external knowledge, invalidating what the farmers themselves are doing. And when it doesn't work a few years down the line, the farmers are expecting us to come up with a solution. But if we integrate smallholder farmer knowledge and understanding of their context into our solutioning, I do strongly believe that we can start to turn it around. I've got a classic example of that from Zambia, where we were working with a whole community on restoring their rangelands. And when we started to sit down and listen to them, we got such nuggets of information that was able to combine with what we were bringing in to create a scenario where 3 years down the line, this rangeland is being restored in front of our eyes. The farmers have got a vested interest, they're invested in it, and it's not an external instruction that they've got no connection to. That's where I think the answer is, Zainab.
Great. There's a question here: how do we best advance environmental and nature positive actions on the regional and national soil health agenda across the region? And this question comes from Simon Winter, and it's linked to another one by Cheryl that says, regarding Simon's question, mostly people talk about carbon credits to advance environment and nature positive actions. However, the amounts of money that are discussed do not make sense for a smallholder farmer. What are the other options? I'd like Dr. Musico to take this on.
So in my introduction, I spoke about regenerative food systems. I did not talk about regenerative agriculture. No? And the difference is you're talking about, before you even go to the soil, how you till the soil, produce food, post-harvest, and markets and consumption. This is a system. Now, what else can be done beyond these credits? Credits, you are right. Some of them are just so negligible. Number one, we're seeing a trend where there is companies doing responsible businesses that indeed promote or buy from farmers who are regeneratively producing. Some of them are paying a premium. Many companies, we can mention so many, Nestle, you can mention, including even Coca-Cola is now beginning to do that. Now, that is interesting in the sense that farmers get income immediately, and there is a link to the positive, the nature-based, solutions they are using. There's a direct link to that from an income perspective. And so, and also there's also the small businesses that can be, linked to regenerative, food systems. So there's much more we can do beyond just credits. Giving farmers, a small amount based on carbon sequestration and all that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Charles Mutevia would also like to know, with the soils in Africa being seriously depleted and the fact that Africa has about 60% of the world's arable land, what does that mean on sustainability of future global food production? Yemi.
All right, that's a very good question, Zainab. So, Charles, it is a well-known statistic that the largest quantum of arable land is in Africa. It is also known that the highest degree of soil degradation is in Africa. So what it means is that what we've got is potentially useful if we manage it correctly. And what we've got, no other continent has anything like it. That's why we have 60% of it. But this 60% is arable land, but needs good and proper management. So I will quickly also add to that to say that we need to do something, and that very urgently is what I describe as we have an ecological state of emergency. Let me repeat it, that we need to operate what is called an ecological state of emergency. Now, you ask me, what does that mean? And I also say, okay, we are discussing all of this. Who is going to take on the responsibility of the collective knowledge that is being spun out here today in a way that it can be translated into development actions? So we have you here, Zainab. To whom are you going to report all of these nice ideas? Or are they just going to also evaporate? So these kind of decisions, when I say that we have an ecological emergency on our hands, what should be done to reverse this? Like if you have a political state of emergency, you deploy soldiers, you deploy peacekeepers. That is the extent to which you understand the implication of a state of emergency. Now, if we say, as experts in this domain, that we do have an ecological emergency on our hands, and yet we maintain business as usual, I think arising from this meeting, we should find ways and means of flying a new flag, SOS, save not our souls, but save our soils, because saving our soils will ultimately save our souls. So it's about the seriousness we are attaching to the information that is hitting us on the face, and what are we going to be doing with this information starting tomorrow? And I push that back onto you, Zainab, a very dear anchor today, that given the information that we have a serious emergency on our hands, it must not end at, oh, the session was beautiful, oh, the session was informative. So what? What are we taking forward from this session? Thank you very much. You're muted.
I'm sorry. There's a question from Fehdi Chanan who'd like to know, can permaculture also be used to maintain the soil? Look.
Can you repeat the question, please? Yeah, can you please repeat the question?
You would like to know, can permaculture be used to maintain the soil? And maybe you could start by telling us, what is permaculture?
Permaculture. Yes. Okay. So permaculture is a system which shows a lot of benefits for soil fertility, for biodiversity, for sustainability. So it's a model which has been, so if you want, reintroduced, which was there from the beginning of agriculture, and indeed it offers very attractive, especially for smallholders, perspective in this regard. So through the permaculture, you can have several crops in parallel. I think Yemi mentioned that before, how one crop can help the other. So the whole idea here is to have this complex of crops, of seasons overlapping one of the other, sort of address all the problems you may face in the soil, but also above ground with pest and disease control. So, we talked about rotation before, permaculture, there's a lot of agronomy here, and I think one of the message here is agronomy. Mandla is doing all his best to train farmers, so are we. There was a comment from Yemi before saying everybody has to contribute and has to do things differently. I think from a private sector perspective, we do things differently, at least we look at Africa very differently. And I'm sure you may have seen what we've been doing, just about the training of farmers. Since 2013, we've trained 4 million farmers all across Africa. And I think if all together we do things differently, because that's what it is about, right? Yemi is absolutely right. There is this, save our soil status. We can't just continue as before. And I can tell you, in seed care, we're clearly looking at innovation very differently. Manla was saying something very interesting before about, it has to come from here. And indeed, listening to, local farmers, listening to what they see, what they experience. We've learned a lot from, Latin American farmers in seed care. And we want to learn more from African farmers. So that's whatever we develop is, meeting their specific needs. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Great. Neva would like to know, what are the regulatory systems that are needed to help unlock the potential of sustainable innovations? Dr. Kimani, you'd like to give it a try? Your microphone is muted.
Coming from a regulatory environment, there are quite a number of them that are already in place, but I was wondering whether it's possible now with a focus to the soils and root health, whether we need the specific regulations, because there are regulations that regulate the fertilizers and other inputs that are put in the soils. In fact, and they continue to be developed. That's why also there was those ones of low manure, because we have a crops act. Most of these regulations, we also have regulations on plant health, and these are even global regulations whereby people meet and discuss how do you produce healthy plants that can be traded globally without risking the countries with the spread of pests and diseases from one country to another. And in all of them, when you go down on what you need to do, is when you see that you need all those healthy soils. So it is as how do you handle your soil. So most of the times when inspectors come to your place, they don't expect your soils to be very degraded by erosions and that's where you're growing your plants. So they will expect you to manage your soils properly. Then also to manage the pests and diseases in a safe manner without endangering the health of the workers, and also making sure they have no pesticide residues in them. There are also other regulations like for environment. Yeah, we should even regulate how far you should be from the river where you're farming, and also how you're maintaining the environment as you do your agriculture. Then when you come down now to the seed regulations, they want you to produce healthy seeds, healthy crops. So there are regulations that will regulate the germinations of the seeds, the vigor of the seeds, and also the health of the seeds. And so you find that the regulators will regulate the spreading of diseases from one farm to another. That's why farmers are encouraged to use certified seeds, and those who are selling seeds will be regulated to ensure that they are selling healthy seeds, because you can contaminate your soils by planting seeds that are not healthy. And especially this can be very serious, especially when you're growing potatoes. You can spread the nematodes from an infected farm to an uninfected farm, bacterial wilt, and all this can make you not be able to produce your potatoes. In fact, I saw someone who is asking whether government just punishes those who are trying to work on the soils. But when the government comes to your place and tries to punish you when you're working on the soils, they're just telling you to protect the soil and not to spread diseases from one farmer to another, or not to degrade the soils and make them be all the top soils that carry the nutrient and help the plant growth. You don't just neglect them and let them be washed away. So that's why the government would come in. Otherwise, if you manage your soils properly, prevent the spread of diseases through to the soils through transferring disease-causing organisms through plants or other ways you are working the soils, then the government will be happy with you. And there are quite a number of regulations, but this is something also we can check now that we are discussing about the root health of the soils, whether we need extra legislation that just focuses on the soils. Otherwise, you find most of there are very many legislations that try to protect that environment of the soil, but they may not be called soil regulations. Thank you.
Dr. Musico has his hand up. I think he wants to comment to the same. And Dr. Musico, as you do that, maybe you can also talk about whether the problem really is regulation or if it is implementing the existing regulations already.
That's exactly what I wanted to mention, Zainab. It's like you read my lips now. They are good. So regulations are good. They play a critical role, like just what Esther is mentioning. There's no dispute. Governments have a critical role in instituting, putting in place good policy instruments that can encourage the good things that happen. So going to what Neva is asking, you can think about what, for example, Yemi was mentioning earlier on in the discussion, mechanization. Is what we call appropriate mechanization that is good for regenerative agriculture. If you want more farmers to buy to purchase the right instruments, then you can put in place incentives or instruments, policy instruments that indeed go into ensuring that those who are doing the right thing do more. And therefore they're not just being discouraged to do something, but they are indeed being encouraged to do something. That's what I wanted to mention here. The policy instruments play a very critical role in that.
Great. Look, you mentioned some trainings that you do with farmers on soil health, and I think this question is directed to you. They ask, when we talk about educating the farmers, do we have any solid experience on how to educate the farmers and track this education and track if this education makes some changes?
It's a very good one. I think it's a very good question and a very important one indeed. And yes, training is something which is it's an art, right? Because we're all different, we all need a different way, we all understand different things, and I'm sure Mandla can talk more than me about trainings. Now, what I can say is that we have initiated those trainings at Syngenta, a few years ago, and we monitor indeed, the impact it has. So you can easily go on our Good Growth Plan website. You will find the data there, on comparing with and without, what's the impact on yield, on water consumption, on carbon emissions. So yes, I think to your auditor question, we try to monitor this. It's very transparent, so please go there and have a look. Happy to share. And yes, it has to be monitored. If you don't measure, you can't treasure, right? So I think the question is absolutely valid, and I would be very interested to know what Mandla has to say about this.
Mandla actually has his hand up. I think he does want to say something about it. Mandla?
Yeah, I do, Zainab, and I think it's a brilliant question because if the truth be told, we've been training farmers for forever, right? We have been providing trainings, and the big question that all of us are asking is, how do we make that training effective? And I think Yemi's call then becomes important, that we're not going to do it through business as usual. We need to shift to business unusual. And I think that's the same with training. So one of the things that we are doing in Excellence in Agronomy is to say, yes, we want to help to deliver, really good advisory services, but we're saying that we're insisting that we need a feedback loop that is coming back from the farmers around how is that information landing, how are they taking it on, and what can be done by the farmers to make sure, by us, for example, to make sure that the farmers are able to work on the information a bit better. So it can't be a one-way street. So training of the future needs to be a continuous cycle. And for us to be able to get that right, there's a number of things we need to be very good at. Number one is what I call user experience. How do we ensure that the farmers who use this information are getting the best experience possible? It's about behavioral science. How do we understand what influences farmers to make different choices from the ones that they're making? So I think that's the new frontier for us to be able to really accelerate uptake of good quality agronomic advice. It's about changing the approach and the methods and creating feedback loops in the way that we do training.
Great, thank you. So we have about 15 minutes to go, so we're going to closing remarks. I'd like to encourage us to keep them short so that we can cover everyone. Yemi, what would you like us to take away from this conversation? Your mic is muted, Yemi, we can't hear you.
Very sorry about that.
Yes, now we hear you.
So, yeah, I did mention to you earlier on that it's important that, yes, we must have concise takeaway messages. I already spoke about creating a kind of a new awareness, what I call save our soils, kind of an ecological state of emergency. Let people begin to understand that there is fire on the mountain. Now, I also would like to say that soil health presents a multifaceted solution to the nuances of climate change. I did say earlier on that soil health is inextricably linked with livelihoods. So what that means is that we'll need to go beyond rhetoric. We need to go beyond calls, beyond resolutions, beyond summit decisions. We need new modalities of engagement and change management, change leadership and management. I repeat, new modalities of engagement and what I call change leadership and management. Because when we need to deal with soil issue, it's not going to be compartmentalized. We've got to do these together. We've got to move these together. So I need to see FARA as a leadership in research. I need to see AUC as a leadership in policy. And finally, I need to see the private sector, like Syngenta Foundation, as a leadership in its leadership in the private sector. And hopefully we can pull this together. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Musico, your closing remarks?
So, the takeaway from this I'd like to emphasize is that, first of all, the climate that is so important, and we're seeing climate change. We've got to remember that it is, inextricably linked to soils, and those soils are important in making sure that farmers have a good life now. It is therefore important to know that in supporting regenerative agriculture, regenerative food systems that we're talking about, we don't just need to look at the soils as soils. We will need to look at the systems, the whole systems approach, in order to ensure that the farmers who do play a service is a service. And I like Sharapan's question about, it's not just about paying them some cheap credits. It is a service that we need to figure out how to pay for, because it is essential that the farmers who maintain these soils do regenerative agriculture, but that they are compensated commensurately. So we've got to promote regenerative food systems that pay and that they save the climate, of course, but we all have a responsibility to ensure that commensurate benefits go to the farmers. Thank you.
Luke, your closing remarks?
I think we'll agree with the urgency. There is no doubt about this. We can't wait anymore. I think the key message I think we're all sharing here is that that we should all contribute. It's not only farmers or only governments. It's hand in hand. We should all work together. As I said, with seed care, we offer one tool. We focus on the seeds and bring to the rhizosphere what is needed, where it is needed. So clearly we look at our business very differently than we did in the past. Innovation, innovation, innovation. And I think very importantly, we're talking Africa here, we try to do it as safely as possible. Work hand in hand with regulators, very important, and we work hand in hand with seed companies. And maybe just to conclude on point on the trainings, which is very important. Now, what we do is by training seed companies, we can indirectly train millions of smallholders. There is this kind of multiplication effect, which is quite nice. So we'd like to thank you for this great forum, and look forward to see seed in the fields for soil and root health.
Great. Dr. Kimani, as you go into your closing remarks, maybe you could also address why governments have oftentimes been accused of coming up with these brilliant policies and then putting them on the shelf and forgetting about them and not really coming to the ground to implement, and what needs to change about that?
Yes, I think there's usually a misconception on the role of government. And in fact, sometimes government has tried to come down to implement things and they have failed terribly. I know in cases whereby even government has tried to give people seed, and maybe they tell them, okay, after you harvest, make sure that you keep some seeds for your next season so that we can go to another place and give others some seeds. But people still eat all the seeds. Actually, the role of government is to make policies, and it's the people to implement those policies, because the government cannot come to farm your farm. It's you to do it. And therefore, I think what people need to know is that those policies are there, as I said, to protect either the environment. They are there to protect human health, plant health, and also create an enabling environment for those who are in business. So the government will make the policies, but it's the people to implement those policies. Maybe if they need something from government, they can say what they need, because you find that that's why you see government with various initiatives like giving people loans, the youth fund, the women fund, various places where people can get some grants to do what they want. And also the government also invests a lot in training the people. In case you are not understanding what needs to be done, then you find that you can be trained. But when it comes to implementation, it's for people to implement. Government just makes policies. Maybe a long time ago, government used to do business, but nowadays they don't. Even when they do, maybe they're trying to intervene something that is for social good, and people have failed to do it. But in my closing remarks, what I wanted to say, maybe we have talked here and things look so complicated, but in mitigating climate change, there are various things that people can just do in their farms. One of them is to plant the various cover crops, whether they are herbs or those green manure, legumes, and that will promote the healthy of the soils. Yeah, you make sure that you have some cover crops on your fields. Then the other one is minimizing the disturbance of the soils. So if you're able to do minimum tillage when you are doing your cropping, then try to do the kind of farming that doesn't disturb your soil so much. Because when you expose it to erosion, soil erosion, and most of the nutrients that are usually on the topsoils will be carried away. The other one, I think Musico has said, you need to diversify the cropping you have so that you have got various kinds of root systems, and it also promotes multiplication of the various microbiology that will also microorganisms that will work on your soils and make it healthy. The other one is don't leave your soils just bare, because you expose them to soil erosion by water or by wind. So if you can have certain crops or trees planted if you're not using the land for other farming. And it would also be good to integrate it with livestock, but don't overgraze. That way you'll be able to maintain the certain level of manure, microorganisms, so a system that is conducive for maintaining your soils and the microorganisms in the soils. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kimani.
Simple things one can do. Yeah.
Yes, you've
Yeah.
given quite a good summary there. Mandla, your final thoughts on this?
Thanks a lot, Zainab, and I think my colleagues have done justice to this topic today. But I think what remains is that if we're going to achieve, a good soil and root health, we need to engage farmers. We need to ensure that farmers are the stewards for good soil and root health. And for us to be able to do that, it's not a one-man show. We need partnerships. We need partnerships that are smarter than the ones that we've done before, but partnerships that also include farmers in the partnership matrix to make sure that whatever advisory services we are making available to them are palatable, are implementable, and show immediate and tangible results for the farmers. And as the CGIAR, we are saying that what is now required is for us to combine forces to achieve agronomic gain at scale. It's no longer enough to have islands of success. We need seas of change. And I think this is urgent. And I fully subscribe to Yemi's call for save our soils by ensuring that our farmers are at the center of the battle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for making time to have this discussion, talking about the soils and root health and how that impacts on food security. You forgot to mention the role of the media in this conversation. How
Creating awareness
down to the farmers and also translating it in the languages that they need. I hope this does not mean that in your work you forget to bring the media along. We are very important to this conversation as well. But I do thank you for making time to have this discussion. We can keep talking also online and on all other platforms. And as we push this agenda forward on how to make Africa's food systems resilient and how to protect Africa's soils and how to mitigate climate change by taking care of the soils. Thank you very much for joining this discussion. My name is Zena Wandati, and we have been speaking to Dr. Esther Kimani from the Pest Control Product Board in Kenya. We've talked to Yemi Bamijo from FARA, and we've also had Mandla Komo from the CGIAR Excellence in Agronomy 2030, Dr. Michael Musico from the Nature Conservancy, as well as Luke Henry, who's the head of seed care at Syngenta. Thank you very much once again. I know I've said we can't say this enough. Thank you for making time to have this discussion with us, and we hope to continue this conversation going forward. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Zainab, for excellent presentation and for making a strong case for the role of media in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.